This is long, so I apologize for that. I've never had to ever tell this story with enough detail to actually explain it all the way, but it is true, and it happened when I was only about 6 years old. In a quiet room, if you press your ear against a pillow, you can hear your heartbeat. As a kid, the muffled rhythmic beats sounded like footsteps on carpet floor. So as a kid, almost every night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I would hear these footsteps and I would be ripped back into consciousness, terrified. For my entire childhood, I lived with my mother in a fairly nice neighborhood that was transitional phase people who were lower economic means they were gradually moving in, and my mother and I were two of those people. We lived in the kind of house that you would be seen transported into two pieces on the interstate, but my mom took care of it, and there were a lot of woods surrounding the neighborhood, so that would pretty much mean there were a lots of woods surrounding the neighborhood that I would play in and explore during the day, but at night, as things often do as a kid, they took a more sinister feeling. This, coupled with the fact that due to the nature of our house, there were fairly large crawl space underneath, filled my mind with imaginary monsters and inescapable scenarios, which would consume my thoughts when I was awoken by the footsteps. I told my mother about the footsteps, and she said I was just imagining things. I persisted through enough, and she blasted my ears with water from turkey baster just to placate me. Since I thought that I would help, of course I didn't, despite all the creepiness and footsteps. The only weird thing that's ever happened was that every now and then I would wake up on the bottom of the bunk, despite having gone to sleep on the top. This wasn't really weird, as I sometimes get up to piss or something to drink that I can only remember just going back to sleep on the bottom bunk. I'm only a child, so it didn't really matter. This would happen once or twice a week, but waking up on the bottom bunk wasn't too terrifying. But one night I didn't wake up on the top bottom bunk. I heard the footsteps, but was gone too far gone to be awakened by them. And when I was awoken, it wasn't from the sound of footsteps or from a nightmare, because I was really cold. Really cold when I opened my eyes. I saw downstairs I was in the woods. I sat up immediately and tried to figure out what was going on. I thought I was dreaming, but that didn't seem right, although neither did me being in the woods. There was the deflated pool float right in front of me, one of those shaped like a shark. This only added to the surreal feeling, but after a while it seemed like I wasn't going to wake up because I wasn't asleep. I stood up to orient to myself, but I didn't recognize these woods. I played in the woods by my house all the time, so I knew them very well. But if they weren't the same woods, then how could I get out? I took a deep breath and felt a soothing pain in my foot, which pretty much knocked me back to where I had just been laying yang the whole entire time. I had stepped on a thorn. By the moonlight, I could see that they were everywhere. I looked at my other foot, but it was fine. And as a matter of fact, so was the rest of me. I didn't have any other scratch on me, and I wasn't even that dirty. I only cried for a little bit and then stood back up. I didn't know which way to go, so I just picked a direction. I resist on the urge to call out, since I wasn't sure if I wanted to be found out by who or what might be out there. I walked for what seemed to be like hours. I tried to walk in a straight line and tried to course correct when I had taken detoured, but when I was a kid, I was afraid. There weren't any howls or screams, and the only once I did hear any noise is what scared me. It sounded like a crying baby. I think now that was just a cat, but I panicked. I ran, veering in a different directions to avoid being the fix of the bushes and collapsed trees, and I was paying close attention to where I had stepped because by my point my feet were in pretty bad shape. I paid too much attention to where I was stepping through enough and not enough to where those steps were leading me, because not long after hearing the cry, I saw something that filled me with some kind of despair I haven't experienced before since it was the pool float. I was only 10 feet from where I woken up. This wasn't magic or some supernatural space bending. I was lost. Up until that moment, I thought more about it getting out of the woods than how I got in. But being back at the beginning caused my mind to swim. I wasn't even sure what were in these my woods. I had only been hoping that they were. I had run in a huge circle around that spot, or did I just turn around and start making my way back? How was I going to get out? At the time, I thought the North Star was the brightest star, so I looked and found the brightest one and followed it. Eventually, things started to look more familiar when I saw the ditch, a dirt ditch my friends and I would have dirt cold wars in, and I knew I had made out of it. By that point, I was walking really slow because my feet hurt so much, and because happy to be seen close to home, that broke through into a light jog when I actually saw the roof over my house of the neighboring, lower said house. I let out a light sob and ran faster. I just wanted to be home. I had already decided that I wouldn't say anything because I had no idea what I could possibly say. I would get back to my house somehow, clean up, and get in my bed. My heart sunk as I rounded the corner to my house, came to fully into view. Every light the house was on. I knew my mom was up, and I knew I would have to explain, or try to explain where I've been, and I couldn't even figure out where to start my run because it came into a jog, which became into a walk. I saw her silhouette through the blinds, and although I was worried about how to explain things to her, that it didn't matter to me at this point. I walked up a few steps to my porch and put my hand on the doorknob and turned right before I could push it open. Two arms wrapped around me and pulled me back. I screamed as loud as I could, "Mom, help me! Please, Mom!" The feeling of the being that close to being safe and then being physically pulled away from it, it filled with kind of dread that is, even after all these years, indescribable. The door I had been torn away from opened, and the flash of hope shot right through my heart. But it wasn't my mom. It was a man, and he was enormous. I thrashed around and kicked at the shins of the person holding me while I was trying to get away from the person who had just come out of my house. I was scared, but I was furious. "Let me go! Where is she? Where's my mom? What did you do to her?" As my throat stunned from screaming, I was drawing in underneath a breath. I became aware of that had been present for far longer than I perceived. "Honey, please calm down. I've got you." It sounded like my mom. The arms loosened and set me down as a man approached me, blocked the porch light out with his hand. I noticed his clothes. He was a cop. I turned to my voice behind me, and saw that it really was my mom. Everything was okay. I began to cry, and the three of us went inside. "I'm so glad you're home, sweetie. I was worried I'd never see you again." By that point, she was crying too. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I just wanted to come home. I'm sorry." "It's okay. Just don't ever do that again. And sure, me or my shins could take it." A little laughter broke from my sobs, and I smiled a bit. "Well, sorry for kicking you. But why did you have to grab me like that?" "I was just afraid you'd run away again." I was confused. "What do you mean?" "We found your note by your pillow," she said, and pointed at the piece of paper that the officer was sliding across the table. I picked up the note and read it. It was running away letter. It said that I was unhappy and never wanted to see her or my friends again. The police officer exchanged a few words with my mom about it on the porch while I stared at the letter. I didn't remember writing the letter. I didn't remember anything about any of this. But even if I sometimes go to the bathroom at night and didn't remember, or even if I could have gone into the woods on my own, even if at all could have been true, the only thing I knew was the point was, this isn't how you spell my name. I didn't write this letter. There. A couple of days ago, I posted a story called Footsteps here on No Sleep. There was a number of questions that made me curious about certain details about my childhood. So I spoke with my mother, exasperated with my questions, and she said, "Why don't you just tell them about the goddamn balloons if they are so interested?" As soon as she said that, I remembered so much about my childhood that I had forgotten. This story will provide some greater context for the previous story, which I think you should read first. Though the order isn't vital importance, reading the first one will put you in my place more effectively, since I remember the events of Footsteps first. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask, and I'll try to answer them. Both of the stories are long, so heads up. I'm just hesitant to leave out any details that might be important. When I was 5 years old, I went to an elementary school that, from what I've come to understand, was really adamant about the importance of learning through activity. It was a part of the new program designed to allow children to raise at their own pace. And the facility, like this, the school encouraged the teachers to come up with really intervene with the lesson plans. Each teacher was given a latitude to create his or her own themes, to which it would run the duration of the grade. And all the lessons in math, reading, etc. were designed to trigger in the spirit of the theme. These themes were called groups, and there was a space group, a sea group, and an earth group. And the group I was in community. In kindergarten in this country, you don't have learned much except how to tie your shoes and how to share, so most of it isn't very memorable. I only remember two things clearly. I was the best at writing my name the right way, and the balloon project, which was really the hallmark of the community group, since it was a pretty clever way to show a community functionated by the basic level. You probably have heard of this activity. One Friday, I remember being a Friday because I was excited about the project and it being the end of the week, towards the beginning of the year. We walked into the classroom in the morning and saw that there was a fully inflated balloon tied off with a string tapped into each of our desks. Sitting on each of our desks was a marker, a pen, a piece of paper, and an envelope. The project was to write the note on the paper and put it in the envelope and attach it to the balloon. We would draw a picture on it if we wanted. Most of the kids started fighting over the balloons because they wanted different colors. But I started on my note, to which I have lost thought about. All my notes I had to follow loose structure, but we all were allowed to be creative with those boundaries. My note went something like this: "Hi, you found my balloon. My name is name, and I attend to this elementary school. You can keep the balloon, but I hope you write to me back. I like Mighty Max, exploring, building forts, swimming, and friends. What do you like? Write back to me soon. Here's $1 in the mail." On the dollar I wrote, "For stamps," right there across the front, to which my mom said it was unnecessary. But I thought it was genius, so I did it. The teacher took a Polaroid of each of us with our balloons, handed them to us in the envelope, along with our letter. They also included a letter that I assumed would explain the nature of the project and sincere appreciation for anyone's participation, writing back and sending photos of their city or neighborhood. That was the whole idea: to build a sense of community without having to leave the school and to establish a safe contact with other people. It much seemed like a very fun idea. Over the next couple of weeks, the letters started to roll in. Most came in with pictures and different landmarks, and each time a letter would come in, the teacher would pin the picture on the big wall map that we had put up showing the letter where we had come from, and so far the balloon had traveled. It was a really smart idea, because we actually looked forward to coming to school to see if we gotten our letter. For the duration of the year, we had 1 day a week where we would write back to our pen pal or another student's pen pal in case if our letters didn't come yet. Mine was the last of those to arrive, and when I came to the classroom, I looked on my desk and once again, I didn't see any letter waiting for me. But as I sat down, the teacher approached me and handed me an envelope. I must have looked excited because As I was about to open it, she put her hand on mine and told me to stop and said, "Please don't be upset." I didn't understand what she meant. Why would I be upset that I know my letter had came in? Intentionally, I was mystified of what she said and she knew what was in the envelope. But now I realize, of course, the teachers had screened the contents to make sure there was nothing obscene. But at the same time, how could I be disappointed? When I opened up the envelope, I understood. There was no letter. The only thing in the envelope was in the Portland, but I couldn't really make out what it was. It looked like a patch of desert, but it was too blurry to picture. It appeared as if the camera had been moved while the picture was being taken. There was no return address, so I couldn't even write back even if I want to. I was crushed. The school year passed on and the letters had stopped coming for all of the other students. After all, you can only continue the correspondence with a kindergartner for so long. Everyone, including myself, had lost interest in those letters completely. When I got another envelope, my excitement was rejuvenated. And then when I relieved the fact that I was getting a letter, when most of my other pen pals either had abandoned their involvement, I made sense that I received another delivery. There had been nothing but a blurry picture in the first one, so this was probably just to make up for that, but then again, there was no letter at all, just another picture. This one was more distinguishable, but I didn't quite understand it. The photograph was angled way up, catching up the top of the corner of the building, and the rest of the image was distorted with the lens flare from the sun. Because the balloons didn't travel very far, and only because they were launched on the same day, the board became a bit cluttered. So the policy for the students still exchanging letters became that we could take photographs home. My best friend Josh, the second highest number of pictures taken at home from the end of the school year, his pen pal was really cooperative and sent him pictures from all over the city neighborhood. Josh took home, and I think 4 of the pictures. I took home nearly 50. The envelopes were all open around the teacher. But after a while, I stopped even looking at the pictures, however. I saved them all up in my drawers that housed in my collection of rocks, baseball cards, comic books, Marvel, Full Metal cards, and for those who might remember, and little miniature baseball batting helmets that I would get out of a vending machine at Winn-Dixie after T-ball games. With the school year over, my attention turned to other things. So, my mom had gotten me a small snow cone from the machine for Christmas that year, and Josh had really coveted it so much that his parents bought him a slightly nicer one for his birthday, which it was towards the end of the school year. That summer, we had the idea that we would set up a snow cone stand to make money. We thought we would make a fortune selling snow cones at just $1. Josh lived in a different neighborhood. We eventually decided that my neighborhood would be better because there was a lot of people who cared for their lawns in the yards. In my neighborhood was slightly bigger. So we did this for about 5 weekends in a row until our mom told us that we had to stop. I've only recently come to understand why she did that. On the 5th weekend, Josh and I were counting our money because we both had a machine. We both had a separate stack of money that we put together in one stack so we could split evenly. We had made a total of $16 that day, and as Josh paid out my $5, feeling profound and surprised, it consumed me. The dollar said, "For stamps." Josh had noticed my shock and asked me if I miscounted. I told him about the dollar and he said, That's no so cool, man." As I thought about it, I came to agree. The idea of the dollar that made it right back to me after changing as much hands floored me. I rushed inside to tell my mom, but my excitement was coupled by her distracting by a phone call. Just made the story incomprehensible, and she responded to me by simply saying, "Oh wow, that's neat." Frustrated, I ran back inside and told Josh I had something to show him. Back in my room, I opened the drawer and took out the stack of envelopes and showed him one of the pictures. I stared at the first picture. We went through about 10 before Josh lost interest and I asked if I wanted to go play in the ditch, a dirt ditch down from the street from my house, before his mom came to pick him up. So that's what we did. We did a dirt war after that for a while, but it was interrupted several times by rustling in the woods around us. There were raccoons and stray cats where we lived, but this was a little making a bit too much noise, and we traded guesses that it was an attempt to scare each other. My last guess was that it was a mummy, but at the end, Josh kept insisting that it was a robot because many sounds we have heard before we left. He got a little serious and looked straight at me in the eyes and said, "You heard it, didn't you? It sounded like a robot. You heard it too, right?" And then I heard it. Since it sounded like mechanical, agreed that it probably was a robot. But now I understand what we heard. When we got back to Josh's mom was waiting for him in the kitchen with my mom. Josh told his mom about the robot. Our moms laughed and Josh went home. My mom and I ate dinner, and then I went to bed. We didn't stay long in bed before I crept out and decided that, due to the day's events, I would revisit the envelope since now the whole affair seemed to be much more interesting. I took the first envelope and set it on the floor and set it to the blurry desert portland on top. I laid on top the second envelope right next to it and placed the oddly angled Polaroid on the building's top corner, and on the top did this with each picture until they formed a grid that was about 5 or 10. I was always taught to be careful with things that I was collecting, even if I wasn't sure if they were valuable. I noticed that the pictures were gradually became more decomprehensible. There was even a tree with a bird on it, a speed limit sign, a power line, a group of people walking to some building. But then I saw something that vexed me, and so powerfully now I can, as I write this, distinctively remember the dizzy feeling and capable of only single repeating thought. Why am I in this picture? In this photograph, the group of people entering the building. I saw myself holding hands with my mother in the very back of the crowd of people. We were at the very edge of the photo, but it was unidentifiably us. And as my eyes swam over the seas of Polaroids, I became increasingly anxious. It was a really odd feeling, and it wasn't fear. It was the feeling you would get if you're in trouble. I'm not sure why I flooded with this feeling, but I sat there floundering, and the distant sense that I had done something wrong. And this feeling only intensified as I looked at the rest of the photos, even the one after I had so powerfully struck me. I was in every photo. None of them were close shots, and none of them were only of me, but I was in every single one of them, off to the side, in the back of the bottom of the frame. Some of them had the tiniest part of my face captured at the very edge of the photo. But nevertheless, I was there. I always was there. I didn't know what to do. Your mind works in funny ways as a kid, but there is a large part of me that was afraid of getting in trouble for simply being still up. Since I already know the looming feeling of having to done something wrong, I decided that I would wait until tomorrow. The next day, my mom was off for work and spent most of my morning cleaning up around the house. I watched cartoons and I imagined and wait until I thought it would be a good time to show her the portents when she got through the mail. I grabbed a couple of the pictures and put them on the table in front of me as I just sat waiting for her to come back in. And when she did return, she was already opening the mail and threw some junk mail into the trash can and said, "Mom, can you come here for a second? I have these pictures. Just give me a minute, honey. I need to mark these on the calendar." After a minute or two, she came and stood up behind me and asked me what I needed. I could hear her shuffling the small mail behind me, but I just looked at the portents and just told her about them. As I explained more and pointed at the pictures that her frequent uh-huhs and okays decreased, as she was suddenly completely quiet, only making a little noise within the mail. The next noise I heard from her sounded like as if she was trying to catch her breath in the room that had no air left in it. At last, her struggling gasps were conquered by what she simply dropped the remaining mail on the table and ran to the kitchen to get the phone. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about these. Don't be mad at me." With the phone pressed to her ear, she was walking and running back and forth shouting to it. I nervously fiddled with the mail next to my portents. The top envelope had something sticking out of it, and I thoughtfully and anxiously pulled it until it came out. It was another Polaroid. Confusion I went through somehow through my Polaroids that had slipped into the stack when she threw the mail down, but when I just turned it over and looked at it and realized I have not seen this before, to my dismay it was me. But this one was much a closer shot, and I was surrounded by trees and smiling. But it wasn't just me. I noticed Josh was there too. This was us from just yesterday. I started yelling for my mom, who was still screaming into the phone. Repeatedly, I yelled at her until she finally responded with, "What?" I could only think of to ask, "Who are you calling?" "I'm talking with the police, honey." "But why?" "I'm sorry, I didn't do anything." She answered with one response that I could never understood until I was forced to revisit those events from the earliest years of my life. She had grabbed the envelope off from the table, and the pictures of Josh and I spun and slid, landing next to the poor lens in front of me. She had the envelope close to my eyes, but I could only look at her for as much as I watched. All the color began draining out of her face, with tears swelling up in her eyes, and she said to me that she had to call the police because there was no postmark. For those of you who read my other stories and asked if there was more, I received the cryptic answers from me. I want to apologize for being dishonest, and I said several times in the comments that there was nothing really that happened after footsteps, but that wasn't true. The events of the following story weren't locked away in the recesses of my mind. I've always remembered them. It wasn't until I remembered balloons and spoke with my mother about the following events. I realized how entwined with the story it was with everything else, but I originally never had planned on sharing this anyway. My desire to withhold this memory was due to mostly the fact that I didn't think that I would show up in good judgment for it. I also wanted to be consent from the other person to tell it, as to not misrepresent what had transpired. I didn't expect there would be a lot of interest in my other stories, so I ever thought that I'd really get pressed for more details, and I would have been happy to keep this to myself for the rest of my life. I haven't been able to reach the other party, but I would feel ingenuous with holding this story from those who wanted to more information. Now that I've spoke with my mother and about another connecting line that has drawn, what follows is accurate to the recollection as I can manage. I apologize for the length. I spent the summer before in my first year of elementary school learning how to climb trees. There was one particular pine tree right outside my house that seemed almost designed for me. Its branches that were so low I could easily grab onto them without a boost. For the first couple of days, I first learned how to pull myself up, and I would just sit on the lowest branch dangling my feet. The tree was outside of our backyard fence. It was easily visible from the kitchen window, and which was now just above the sink. Before long, my mother and I could develop another routine where I would go play on the tree. She washed the dishes because she could easily see me while she did other things. As the summer passed, my abilities grew, and before too long, I was climbing fairly high. As the tree got taller, its branches not only got thinner, but more widely spaced. I eventually reached a point where I couldn't actually climb any higher, and so the game I had to change. I began to concentrate on speed, and in the end, I could reach my highest branch in 25 seconds. I got too confident that one afternoon I tried to step up from the branch from before, and I had firmly grasped onto the next one. I fell about 20 feet and broke my arm really bad in two places. My mom was running towards me yelling. I remember her sounding like she was underwater. I don't remember what she said, but I do remember being surprised by how white my bone was. I was going to start kindergarten with a cast and wouldn't have many much friends to sign it. My mom must have felt terrible because the day before I started school, she brought me home a kitten. He was just a baby and it was striped with tan and white, and as soon as she put him down, he crawled into an empty case of soda that was sitting on the floor. I named him Boxes. Boxes was an only outside cat when he escaped. My mom had him declawed so he wouldn't destroy the furniture. So as a result, we did our best to keep him inside. He'd get out every now and then, and we would have to find him somewhere in the backyard chasing around some bug or lizard, though he could hardly ever catch one because he had no front claws. He was pretty exhaustive, but we always catch him and carry him back inside. He scrambled to look over my shoulder. I told my mom that it was because he was planning on his strategy for next time. Once inside, we give him some tuna fish, and when he came to learn what had just sounded like the can opener might signal, he became running whenever he heard of it. This conditioning came in very handy later because towards the end of our time in that house, boxes would get out much more often and would run under the house into crawl spaces where neither of us would want it to follow because it was crammed and probably crawling with bugs and rodents. Indigenously, my mom thought that she took the hook and can opener and extension cord back out and run it outside the hole where boxes had gone through. Eventually, he would emerge from with his loud meows, looking excited by the sound, and then horrified of how such a cruel ruse on him and the can opener with no tuna made a sense to boxes. The last time he escaped was under the house was our last day in it. My mom had put the house on the market and we began packing our things. We didn't have much and we stretched the packing out for a while. While I packed up most of my clothes at my mom's request, my mom could tell I was really sad about moving and wanted the transition to be smooth for me. And I guess she thought that having my clothes in the box would reinforce the idea that we were moving things, but couldn't catch that much. When boxes goes out as well, we were loading some things into the moving van. My mom cursed at it because she had already packed the can opener and wasn't sure where it was. I pretended to go and look for it so I wouldn't have to go under the house. My mom, probably completely aware of my little scam, moved one of the panels and crawled in. She came out with boxes pretty quickly and seemed to be unnerved, which made me feel better getting out of it. My mom quickly made some phone calls while I packed a little more, and then she came to my room and told me that she spoke with the realtor and that we were going to start moving into the other house that day. She said she liked it and it was excellent news, but I thought we had more time in the house. She originally said that we weren't moving until the end of next week, and it was only Tuesday. What's more is that we weren't completely finished packing, but my mom said sometimes it was just easier to replace the things than pack them and just haul them over to the city. I didn't even get to grab the rest of my boxed clothes. I asked if I could call Josh to say bye, but she said that we could just call him from our new house. We left in our moving van. I had managed to stay in touch with Josh for years, which is surprising since we no longer went to the same school. Our parents weren't close friends, but they knew that we would accommodate for our desire to see each other one day by driving us back and forth for sleepovers. Sometimes every weekend for Christmas one year, our parents would even pool their money and got us some really nice walkie-talkies that were adverse to work across range extended past between in distance of our houses. They also had batteries that could last for days. If the walkie-talkie was on and not used, they would only occasionally work well enough and we could talk across the city. But when we stayed over and we used them around the house, talking in a mock radio speak that we had taken from the movies, and they had worked great for it, thanks to our parents who were still friends when we were 10. On weekends, I was staying over at Josh's and my mom called me to say goodnight. She was still pretty watchful, and even when she wasn't actually watching me, but I had gotten used to it that I didn't even notice it. And even if Josh did, she sounded upset. Boxes was missing. This must have been a Saturday night because I spent the night at Josh's the previous night and was gonna go home the next day because we had school on Monday. Boxes had been missing since Friday afternoon. I gathered that she had not seen him since returning home after dropping me off. She must have decided to tell me he was missing because if he didn't come home before I did, well, I would be devastated at it that not only his absence, but how could she have kept it from me? She told me not to worry. He'll come back. He always does. But Boxes never came back. 3 weeks later, after I stayed at Josh's again, I was still upset about Boxes, but my mom told me that there have been many times where pets disappeared from homes for weeks or even months, only to return on their own. She said they always knew where their home was and they would try to get back. I was explaining this to Josh when just a thought hit me that interrupted did my own sentence and say out loud, "What if Boxes fought the wrong home?" Josh was confused. "What? He lives with you. He knows where his home is." "But he grew up somewhere else, Josh. He was raised in my old house a couple neighborhoods away. Maybe he still thinks of that place as home as I do." "Oh, I get it. Well, that'd be great. We'll tell my dad tomorrow and he'll take us over there so we can have a look." "No, he won't, man. My mom says we couldn't ever go back to that place because of the new homeowners wouldn't want to be bothered. She also said they told you your mom and dad did the same thing." Josh persisted. "Okay, we'll go out exploring tomorrow and make our way to your old house." "No! If we get spotted, your dad will find out and then so will my mom. We have to go there ourselves. We have to go there tonight." It didn't take much longer of convincing to get Josh on board, since he usually was the one to come up with ideas like this. But we had never snuck out of this house before. It actually turned out to be incredibly easy. The window to his room was open. In the backyard, he had a latch on the wooden fence that wasn't locked. After those two minor hurdles, we slipped off into the night, flashlights and walkie-talkies in hand. There was two ways to get to from Josh's house to my old house. We could walk on the street and make the turns or go for the woods, which would take about half the time. It would have taken at least 2 hours to walk there, taking the street, but I suggested we go the other way anyway. I told him that it was because I didn't want to get lost, and Josh refused, and he said that if we seen, they might recognize him and then tell his dad. He threatened to go home if we didn't take the shortcut. I just accepted because I didn't want to go by myself. Josh didn't know about the last time I walked through these woods at night. The woods weren't much as creepy as a friend and a flashlight, so if things were making pretty good time. I wasn't entirely sure where we were, but Josh seemed confident enough that bolstered my morale. We passed through a particularly thick patch of tangled trees, and when the strap on the walkie-talkie got caught on the branch, Josh had the flashlight, and so I was struggling to get the walkie-talkie free when we heard Josh say, "Hey man, wanna go for a swim?" I looked over to where he was shining the flashlight, and though I closed my eyes as I did, because I knew where we were, he was pointing at the pool float. There it was where I woken up in the woods all those years ago. I felt a lump in my throat and felt the stinging of fresh tears in my eyes. As I continued to struggle with the walkie-talkie, frustrated, I yanked hard enough to break it free, and I turned it on to Josh, who had practically laid down in the pool float in a mock sunbathing pose. As I walked towards him, I stumbled and nearly fell into a large hole that was sitting on top of this small clearing. But I regained my balance and stopped right at the edge. It was deep. I was surprised by the size of the hole, but more surprised by the fact that I didn't remember it. I had realized that it might have not been there at night because it wasn't in the same spot where I had woken. I put it out of my mind and turned to Josh. "Quit messing around, man. You saw this when I was stuck over there, and you were not just going to lay there and joking around on this float." I punctuated at the sentence with a kick to an exposed part of the float. A screeching rose from it.